action. Cut the lights, this is it, the night of nights. No more rehearsing and nursing a part. We know every part by heart.
Hello there, true believers. This is Head Speaks, a proud member of the Headcast Network family of shows. As usual, I am your host, Aaron Moss, aka Head. This is my mostly monthly Headcast, where I talk about comics, movies, role-playing games, TV shows, and anything else geeky that I want. So sit back and enjoy the ride. Let's begin.
What height will hit? On with the show, this is it.
Welcome to Head Speaks, episode 48. As usual, I am your host, Aaron Brotherhead Moss. So we're still going through our Armageddon 2001 journey. Last month we took a break as the Blackest night fell upon us, and we covered that crossover. Did you guys enjoy that? Let me know. I'm anxious to hear from you guys. But we're still not rejoining the Armageddon 2001 yet, due to delays with my next host or guest host. We've had to push it back a little bit. So in the meantime, I didn't want to leave you guys with no episode. So I've got this episode. We've got two parts this time. We're going to do a At the Movies of Head, where I'm going to rate the DC comic book movies. This is my rating at the time I recorded this. I actually recorded this like a month or two ago, and I was going to put it in an episode. Things got out of hand. I forgot about it. So, again, this may be a little out of date. I don't think this includes Shazam. This was before I watched Shazam, so it's not going to include that. But it's the 5 DC movies at the time, like I said, a couple months ago when I recorded it. And then after that, I've got an episode of Behind the Podcast. This episode, I'm talking with a previous guest, Derek WC from the Fanholes Podcast. So go ahead and check out both of these. But let me know what you guys think. I'm definitely curious if you guys like the show or not. You can email me at head@headspeaks.com. You can leave me a message at the Facebook page, at the website, head.headspeaks.com. Rate me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. But let me know how I'm doing. Let me know what you guys think. I'm anxious to hear from you guys. Also, next month, we should be back into our Armageddon 2001. We should be looking at Hawk and Dove with, I believe should be my guest, Jonathan Schaefer-Hames. And I believe his wife Maggie's going to be joining us from the Married of Comics podcast. And we'll see what else we got for you. So I'm going to go ahead and start the show with my At the Movies of Head. So here we go. So on this episode of At the Movies of Head, I'm going to look at all the different comic book movies from the two big companies. I'm stealing this idea from another podcasting buddy. I'm sure several groups have done it so far, but I'm stealing this. I've recently listened to Andrew Leyland on the Glittering Palace of Delights or whatever, and he's recently covered this and listed the Marvel movies from the worst, in his opinion, to the best. Again, not necessarily worst to the best, but his least favorite to his favorite. So I decided I'm going to take a page out of his book and do the same, but I'm going to do it for both Marvel and DC. But separately, because, again, there's not a lot of comparison between the two, unfortunately. Comic book-wise, I'm a DC guy, but movie-wise, I am a Marvel guy. So first up, we're going to look at the DC movies, and I'm going to list them from the worst, in my opinion, to the best. There's been 5 movies as of this recording that I'm looking at. So let's take a look at them. And like any proper list, we're going to start in reverse order. So we'll start number 5 on my list, which, seeing how I do a Task Force X podcast, this should be number 1. But sadly, it's number 5. We're going to go with the Suicide Squad movie from 2016. I need to do a commentary on this movie, but the more I watch it, the more I dislike it. Though I never got to the point yet of hating it. It's not. I want to say it's not a good film, but it's not a good Suicide Squad film. Anywhere from and again, these are, I guess I should say now, there may be spoilers for even all these movies, so if you don't want spoilers, don't listen. But Suicide Squad, starting with the horrible Leto Joker we've got from both his performance and the makeup design, the design of the character, I just hated that. Not a big fan of the slutty Harley Quinn that we got. Like the more traditional Harley Quinn. The race changed Deadshot. The lackluster Rick Flag. And the villainous Amanda Waller. This movie had a lot of bad notes on it. I heard on, I think it was the Now Playing podcast that was done by a video game director, was edited by a video game director or music video director or something. You can see that there's a lot of flash and style, but very little substance to it. And again, I'll talk more about this on my Task Force X podcast. I've talked about it some. I'll talk about it again later. But I felt the plot itself was a bad plot for a first movie. That the Suicide Squad had to stop one of their own. That's not a bad idea, but it should have been maybe the second film. The first film should have been them getting together, forming the team before having to fight one of their own, in my opinion. Wasn't a fan of the way they did the Enchantress in this movie. I am more partial to the witch's hat and the skimpy little outfit she wears in the fully clothed outfit that she had in the Suicide Squad. Not this whatever half slutty thing she had on. Plus, I don't know. And that's coming from me. I do like they touched on her brother, Incubus, who was from the comics. That was nice, but there was a lot of problems with it. Also, the fact that, they got a covert team to go into, Detroit, to fight this big menace that a lot of heroes should have seen, and we should add some more heroes in it. I did like the nice touch that the building they went to rescue Waller was called the John Ostrander Building, who was the creator of the original villainous team of Suicide Squad. Because there was an earlier Task Force X Suicide Squad, but John Ostrander created the great team, and the one that I cover in my Task Force X podcast. But yeah, this movie had a lot going wrong with it. I'm assuming they made Deadshot black because they wanted to have more black people in the movie, more representation. I think that was silly. They should have left Deadshot as he was, and because there are black characters they could have pulled from the comic. A great one would have given him another hero to, maybe not necessarily a hero. He started out villainous, but he became a hero. I'm talking about Bronze Tiger, aka Ben Turner, a perfectly good black character that part of the Suicide Squad, part of their history, part of the origin of the Suicide Squad. It would have been a damn fine addition to the movie. I think that Bronze Tiger would have been perfect for it. I just think they missed the boat. So again, this is the lowest on my spectrum. I will, since I do have a Task Force X podcast, I will talk more about this later. Trust me on this. I've talked about it before my show. I plan at some point in the future, hopefully near future, doing a commentary track on it. I've got a couple people lined up for that. Just finding time to get them together and do it. But that's number 5 on my list. The fourth one on my list, my second least favorite of the movies, and again, not saying any of them are bad per se, but this is my least favorite of them, is Man of Steel. I enjoyed the movie, don't get me wrong. Again, none of these are horrible movies. It's just out of the list, this is my least favorite, I believe, out of them. And again, this list is purely mine, purely subjective or objective, whichever. It could change at any moment, given my whims and fancy, but Man of Steel, again, it was a good movie overall. My problems with it, why it's so far down the list, the main one is that, and I've said before, that Superman, his costume was too dark. He was, again, while he wasn't, killing everyone in sight, dark, it was a darker movie. To me, Superman should be a character full of hope and enlightenment and give you hope for the future. There was a couple scenes in here and there that did, but overall, I didn't get that sense of hope I wanted from this movie. I didn't care for the way that Pa Kent said, "To heck with everyone else, let's worry about you." I understand what they were going for, but that's not Pa Kent to me. Pa Kent to me is, oh yeah, you got these powers, Clark. I understand that, you got these problems, you got these people that's trying to, maybe try to use you, but you need to do what you can to help people. To me, that's Pa and Ma Kent. And I could have dismissed this and just said, okay, but as long as Ma Kent's a little more people-friendly, but I think it was the Batman vs. Superman movie kind of shot that down. So in retrospect, I don't care for Pa's writing in here, the way he's written. I don't have a problem with him killing Zod at the end of the movie. Again, he's done that in the comics, Under Less. He's done that in the original, Superman 2 movie. So he's done it before, so it's not a new thing. I didn't have a problem with that. I understood completely why that was. I had a problem with the destruction of Metropolis. This came out during the same era as like Pacific Rim and Transformers and a lot of these other movies that destruction porn. I have a problem. Again, maybe it's because I'm getting old, but I get tired. And maybe if this had been a little movie I'd seen it may have been a little bit different. But again, seeing all these other movies, same destruction and destruction of the city, so much utter destruction, I just get tired of it. So while I can't necessarily fault Man of Steel for that, I do fault that they had all that destruction of Metropolis. I understand what they're going for, but again, all that destruction I'm 48 at this point in my life. I just get tired of seeing movies as just destruction for destruction's sake. I don't know. Again, it wasn't a horrible movie, but it had some problems that brought it down on my list. Though having said that, I will say I do like the way that Henry Cavill portrayed the Man of Steel. I thought he looked like the Man of Steel. Again, I wanted the costume to be a little more brighter, a little more blue, a little more red, a little more yellow. Not as dark and danky, but I wanted Superman to be a little more hopeful, if you will. But I thought he did a good job as an actor. So I don't blame him. I blame the writers and maybe the director or producer. Maybe WB, because most of these films have this darker overtone that kind of detracts from it, in my opinion. But that's number 4 is The Man of Steel. Number 3, in my opinion, is Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. I don't think this movie deserves all the hate it gets. It wasn't great. It's third on my list of DC films, but it wasn't horrible. One of my biggest problems with this movie, as I've said elsewhere, is I don't like the 20-year gap between Batman and Superman having came about. Because in the movie, Batman's been around for 20 years, Superman's only been around for like a year and a half. I think they should be contemporaries. I think started Batman too old to do the movie proper. They should be contemporaries. Batman shouldn't be a tired, ready to kill everybody vigilante by this point. He should be the younger, more youthful Bruce. When I first heard Ben Affleck was going to be Batman, I was like, I don't know. I saw Argo. I changed my tune. I said, he might do all right at it. And yeah, he did a good job for what they gave him. Again, I don't blame most of the actors in here. I just feel that the writing and some of the directing wasn't where it should have been. But things I did like in this, just so it's not an all, I don't like this fest. Again, I like the interaction between Batman and Superman. I thought the introduction of Wonder Woman was very fantastic. That was great. I liked Jeremy Irons as Alfred. At first, I wasn't sure because I think Irons is a great actor. I just don't see him as Alfred, but he did roll well as well. He does everything really amazingly. A lot of people give Doomsday crap. I thought Doomsday looked really good. I don't know about the whole electrical power things he kind of displayed, but other than that, I thought he didn't have the bony protrusions like he did in the comic, but they were starting to grow before he died. But other than that, I thought he looked like he should. A lot of people compared it to the Abomination. I can't blame DC for that, because again, I think Doomsday looked, if you remove his bony protrusions, like he looked a lot like the creature did. I have to blame Marvel for making their Abomination look less like the comic book. A lot of people also give hate to the Martha scene. I enjoyed that. I thought it was appropriate. It could have probably been written a little better, maybe. But a lot of people say, oh, that's stupid. The mom have the same names. Well, again, the movie didn't make that up. Both Bruce and Clark have moms with the same names. There's just the first time I think I've ever heard it referenced and mentioned and brought into detail that their moms share the same name. And again, a lot of people say, well, it made no sense. Well, it does to me, because to me, Batman, and again, it goes back to part of my main problem about Batman try that again. It goes back to my main problem about Batman being too old, in quotes in this case, that Batman started off more like, in my opinion, like the Batman we see from the comics. It's still the Dark Knight, but not as willing to let people die as he does in this movie. In fact, there's a great line earlier when he's talking with Alfred, and Bruce says something along the lines of, there's no difference between me and the villains. And Alfred said there used to be. Which says that Batman wasn't always this cold and heartless in the past. I think his death of Robin, plus everything else, 20 years of crime fighting have led him to this point. And so when he's fighting Superman, and Superman tells him, save Martha, and that first of all, it mentions his mom. Well, not mentioning his mom, but it's his mom's name, so it makes him think his mom, and it makes him realize, oh shit, what have I started this in honor of my parents, to avenge my parents, to honor my parents' memory, and this is what I turned into. If my mom could see me, if my mom Martha could see me now, she would be ashamed of me. And also, then when Lois comes up and tells him that that's his mom's name, it's Clark, Superman's mom's name, it makes Bruce, again, this is my opinion, it's not really, and maybe that's part of the problem, it's not quite clearly stated in the movie, but I think, come on, people, use your brain and think about things. But I think it makes Bruce think, because before, he's thought this alien creature that came here, brought destruction upon Earth, even though we know it's not Superman's fault that Zod came and tried destroying the world. Superman stopped it from happening. From Bruce's perspective, this is an alien that came and helped destroy a large chunk of Metropolis, and finding out that he has a mom just like he does, in fact, very close to his mom because of the name thing, plus the fact they're both hot, but that's another story entirely, makes him realize that maybe Superman's not this alien monster he thought he was, that maybe there's this Earth human that's willing to stand up for him. He's got a mom. Maybe he's a little more human, in quotes, than Bruce was giving him credit for. Again, it might have been written a little better, maybe a little less clunky, but I personally enjoyed it. I thought it very fitting. And another scene people give crap to is the scene when Clark has Bruce go save his mom, and so Batman shows up to Martha Kent, and she's like, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm a friend of your son's." Everyone says, "Well, you're not a friend of his sons. You guys were just fighting just a few minutes ago." I think these people need to chill the blank out. I mean, yes, they were fighting. He was trying to kill him a few moments ago, but then Batman kind of softened a little bit, and this is a bit of an emergency. Instead of spending half an hour explaining to Clark's mom how, well, yeah, I thought your son was an inhuman alien monster, so I was trying to kill him, but then we talked things out, and you got the same name as my mom, so it made me realize that spending half an hour explaining why he's there to save her, it's quickest just to say, well, I'm a friend of your son's. That wraps it up, and it kind of shorthand. I mean, again, this is an emergency situation. So I did not have a problem with that. A lot of people I've heard on the internet complain about that. I think they need to shut up. That's my opinion. I thought that was a good scene, and it got the job done, in my opinion. So again, like I say, it wasn't a bad movie. I enjoyed Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, and the name may be a little long, but that's another story entirely. But yeah, I enjoyed Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. I thought it was a good movie. It wasn't the greatest. Still some problems, as I've talked about. But overall, I enjoyed it. Moving on to number 2 on my list, Justice League. And this is number 2, partly just because of I've waited 48 years, or pretty close. I guess actually the time is 47 years, or pretty close, for a Justice League movie. This has gathered Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Cyborg. Well, wait, Cyborg, that's another issue. That's a comic issue. But, yeah, I didn't say Flash and Aquaman because I don't know if I saw them in this movie, but I'll get to that in my complaints. And that's why this isn't my number 1 movie. But overall, I enjoyed the movie. Again, there is part of the problems with it is still that whole time dissolution from, between Superman and Batman being around. I don't like that still, but nothing named about it because that was started already. There seems to be some timeline wonkiness with Wonder Woman. We'll get to that in the Wonder Woman movie also. DC / Warner Brothers doesn't seem to have their act together. Doesn't seem to know what they're doing yet, which is part of the problem with DC Universe movies after all, overall. But Justice League, I enjoyed, as I said, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. I enjoyed the guy that played Cyborg. I did enjoy CGI throughout most of the movie. I thought his CGI was very wonky and it looked like CGI. And I'm the kind of guy that doesn't usually notice CGI issues. Like with Superman's mustache, everyone complained about. I didn't notice the problem with that. In case you don't know, apparently they had to do some reshoots. Henry Cavill was shooting Mission Impossible 6 or 7 or 55 or whatever they're up to. And in that movie had a mustache. Well, Universal, whoever does the Mission Impossible movies didn't want him to shave the mustache. So Warner Brothers had to go in there and CGI it out. I don't recall. I'll have to watch again and see. I knew about it, but I didn't see it. I didn't notice any of those scenes with it in there. So it's fine. But Cyborg, I noticed it was very CGI-like. Other characters I didn't care for. Flash, I hated the costume. I thought the character did a horrible job. He was written horribly. Not only was he not blonde, he was black-haired, which bugs the hell out of me. And he looks like he had ADD or something. He was, and again, I could see a feature having that problem. That's not Barry. If you're going to call him Barry Allen, you need to make him Barry Allen. He was unemployed, living in, wherever it was, tunnels or whatever, scraping up pieces of technology together. That's not Barry Allen. Bruce had to get him a job at the end. I disliked the whole character, the whole thing they did. The costume was horrible, as I said. The special effects was interesting, but it doesn't make up for everything else. Also, I intensely disliked Aquabro, as me and the wife call him. He seemed more like a frat guy than Aquaman. I hated the dark hair. I hated the whole kind of bro attitude he had. Again, these two characters is what really brought this down to second place for me. If these guys had been written better, it may have been up a little higher, maybe. Well, he's got one more spot, but it could have maybe been higher. Also, the villain, Steppenwolf wasn't a bad villain. He was kind of CGI, kind of fake looking. I think they should have went for Darkseid like I originally heard they were going to, but I can understand why they didn't. Since Marvel was coming out with, and they've been slowly introducing Thanos. Darkseid and Thanos are very much the same character, just for different companies. So I can understand why they didn't want to go with Darkseid, since Marvel's already introduced Thanos, and they would just be, people don't know, oh, you're just copying Marvel. Well, yeah, but that's the character. But overall, I enjoyed the movie. I thought the fight scenes were pretty good. I was talking on a message board, they were saying one reason Flash was relegated to saving people outside instead of fighting Steppenwolf is that he was afraid of Steppenwolf. I don't know if that's true, and if so, it's even worse because the Flash, Barry Allen, even if he's afraid of something, he's going to fight it head on. He's not going to just be sidelined just because of that. They did, again, spoilers, they did bring Superman back from the dead when he died in the last movie, which I forgot to mention that they did kind of adapt the Death of Superman movie in Batman vs. Superman. I enjoyed that. Again, more of the wonkiness at the end of the last movie, Batman vs. Superman, when they were at Kansas, And something else I forgot to mention on that, I'll mention that real quick. They buried, in Batman vs. Superman, going back a movie real quick, they buried Clark Kent in Kansas, and they had an empty tomb in Metropolis where they buried Superman at. I think they should with the comic approach and kept it the same and kept Clark with not finding his body and burying Superman in Metropolis. That way, when they bring him back, and they're going to bring him back, it would make it easier to explain that, Clark Kent would just vanish in the rubble and they found him, much like they did in the comic. They could have followed the comic. The comic laid this out for him. All they had to do was follow the layout that was already there. But instead, they buried Clark Kent and they had a body in Gotham, in Smallville. So now they're going to have to explain why Clark Kent's back alive. I think he kind of dig himself in a hole. They're going to probably screw it up getting out of it like they normally do, but we'll see what happens. But as I was saying, at the end of Batman vs. Superman, we see the ground kind of lifting up where Superman was at, kind of insinuating he was coming back to life or something was happening to bring him back to life. I think maybe they didn't know what they were going to do. They wanted to give you a hint that he was coming back. But in this movie, that ties nothing to do with that. Batman digs up his body, puts him in the fluid chamber, whatever, that created Doomsday, and used Flash to bring him back to life. A little wonky, a little clunky there. That could have done that better. But overall, it was a decent movie. And I heard this was going to be a 2-part movie originally, and they scrapped it, and now it's just a one-movie standalone movie. Again, I don't know how much that was conjecture and fanboy speculation, but that's what I've heard. But that's Justice League, which is number 2 on my list. Then we move to the top of the list with my favorite movie of the DC Universe movies, Wonder Woman. I thought Wonder Woman was a great movie. Like everything else, it may have its problems, but I think it had less than all the rest of the movies. And that's why on the top of my list. It was great to see a female-oriented mainstream DC superhero character. I mean, I know there's been Elektra had her own movie, and there's been these other characters that had movies, but I think Elektra dropped the ball heavily. And then there's been a lot of independent characters from independent companies that had movies, but I think Wonder Woman, discounting Elektra just because the movie had so many problems, Wonder Woman was the first major character, especially from DC. And again, this kind of where Marvel's dropping the ball. They've got a Captain Marvel movie lined up with a female hero, but they've had Wasp. They could have had a movie off of her already, but they haven't, so they're kind of behind the 8 ball on that. But other than that, we'll get to Marvel later. But I thought Wonder Woman did a great job bringing her into the world. It was set a period piece. They set it in World War I, I believe it was, because Captain America was in World War II, or vice versa. I forget now. But it's in the other World War because Captain America was in the other one, so and they don't want to be the same as that. But I love the inclusion of Steve Rogers. I thought that was great. Only problem including Steve Rogers in her origins is he may not be around age-wise for the later movies, but that's a moot point, I guess. But overall, yes, I enjoyed Wonder Woman. I thought the humor was good. My daughter loved it. My family loved it. So, and that's a big plus when my family loves it because, again, my daughter's a geek. She's much like her dad. My wife is kind of geeky, not as much so. So when she loves these movies, they're good. So, again, that's my top DC. That's my DC list. Start at the bottom, going up. And I think I was going to do this all in one show, but I think, again, I'm going to split these up. I will do DC this time, and the next time I'll do the Marvel movies or later ones. So those are my top 5 in order DC movies. And these are just from, again, the current DC cinematic universe. It's not counting all the junk and the good stuff that came before. Maybe at some point I'll rate those also, but this is just for the current DC cinematic universe. So what do you guys think? Am I crazy? Am I right? You can email me at headspeaks.com and let me know what you think about these movies. Are they good? Did you like them? Am I wrong? Did you miss something? Did I miss something? Let me know. Now sit back while I play some commercial breaks, some commercial promos, and we'll be right back. Head Speaks will be back after these important messages.
Hi, John.
Hi, Maggie.
I'm still wrapping my brain around the fact that we're married.
Me too, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Aw.
Oh, hey, I was looking at these old comics and I noticed that there's
Hold
a
that thought. Why don't we talk about it on our podcast?
We have a podcast?
It seems like the logical next step. We get married, we change our names, we combine our comic collections, we start a podcast about comic books.
Well, I can't fault your logic, but there are plenty of podcasts out there already. Do you really think we'll have anything new and interesting to say?
Oh, I think we'll manage. Welcome to the Married with Comics podcast, where we constantly up.
It goes from Marvel Girl to Phoenix to Marvel Girl to Jean Grey to Phoenix to Dead.
And then apparently he's so consumed with his own thoughts that he runs right past 3 monkeys in an alleyway. A brainwave camera took a picture of that guy's head. A brainwave camera.
And Ben's just basically, whatever you gotta do to stop the commies, Nick.
So join us at the Married with Comics podcast, where two newlyweds with a love for comics intelligently, critically, and thoughtfully discuss comic books.
Also listen as we goof around, make jokes, and make fun of John for mispronouncing names.
I do that a lot.
Sometimes we'll pick a topic and review and discuss comics that relate to the topic.
And sometimes we'll pick up a comic and see what discussion topics come up. And sometimes we'll spend an entire episode talking about how much Maggie loves Batman.
The only thing that's almost as strong as my love for you is my love for Batman.
The Married with Comics podcast, available directly on our site at marriedwcomics.libsyn.com, on iTunes, and wherever good podcasts are found. Also, check us out at Facebook at the Married with Comics podcast.
We've got everything you need.
John Jones of Mars, Katmatui of Gorgar, Ronnie Raymond of Earth, Al Bratt of Earth, Jenny Lynn Naden, Arthur Curry, Carter Hall, Kendra Saunders, Ted Cord, Arani Desai, Paco Ramon, Hank Haywood, David Knight, Erwin Bowen, Wesley Dodds, Charles McNider, Terry Sloan, Tara Markov.
"10 years ago, a crashing wave of light erupted across the DC universe. A multicolored spectrum of energy bathed the cosmos in a war of light. Rage clashed against passion. Hope sought to stifle fear. Greed to choke out compassion. And in the middle of it all, the will to keep going and fight for all. Now this war has come to the surface of our planet, because while the light fights, the darkness rises." Hero, villain, friend, foe, family. Across the universe, the dead have risen, and it's going to take every available podcaster to fight back. In 2016, we covered the dawn of the Justice League with Justice League Year 1. In 2017, we soaked in the seminal Justice. Last year, we threw it back to the Silver Age. But this year's JLMay podcast event covers an event that knows not the boundaries of death itself. JLMay covers Blackest Night in celebration of the event's 10-year anniversary. Our coverage begins on April 30th with the podcast of Oa and proceeds through the entire month of May with Chris and Reggie's Cosmic Treadmill, the Idlehead of Diablo, the Fire and Water Podcast, Head Speaks, Coffee and Comics Podcast, Longbox Crusade, Waiting for Doom, Task Force X, the Starman Manhunter Adventure Hour, the Dr. DC Podcast, the Birds of Prey Podcast, Justice's First Dawn, and ends with the Lantern Cast. So join us this May, because across the DC universe, the dead have risen. Where will you be?
This be some spread. Gambit not gonna be playing solitaire tonight.
Gambit, what are you doing over here? Talking to yourself in the third person? And what's all this food?
Oh, Professor, Gambit have plans tonight. Once Cher shows up, Gambit gonna wine and dine her. Then we gonna listen to Fanholes, the pop culture podcast made for the fans, by the fans.
Fanholes? I'll not have my school turned into a den of debauchery and science fiction trivia. No, Gambit. You'll just have to perform your obscene mating rituals elsewhere.
Uh-oh, sound like the professor getting a little cranky. Gambit think it time for you to go to bed.
What? What are you? Oh! Unhand me at once! Unhand me, you swamp-fed ignoramus!
Relax, mon ami. Gambit just gonna tuck you in real nice.
X-Men, emergency help! Curse you, Fanholes!
Hey, don't mess with the Fanholes.
Weekly content on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and fanholespodcast.blogspot.com.
My eyes become baby, I compare you to a kiss from.
That damn song is stuck in my head now. Thanks a lot, Pete Holmes. My mind!
And now back to Head Speaks. And welcome to this segment of Behind the Podcast. Joining me today is Derek WC. Hey, Derek.
Hey, Aaron. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. Thanks for joining me to talk about your podcast a little bit. Well, before we get started, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody what show you have? What is the name of your podcast?
I currently podcast over on the Fanholes Podcast, and we have I guess at this point, it's a network of podcasts. It's essentially me and four other guys, and we got together back in 2011 and started a show, and we called it the Fanholes Podcast. It was the name came about because we were kind of thinking, fanboy assholes, part man, part cop, all fanhole, that kind of notion. And so that's the name we came up with. And, originally it started as just a single, sole show, which we still do what we call the quote unquote proper show every now and then for things that don't fit under kind of theme specific show banners and everything. But originally, we talked about comics and science fiction and Transformers and fantasy and pop culture and all the things that would encompass. A lot of the times they were kind of what we like to call, Frankenstein shows, a bunch of hodgepodge of random topics, mainly to, keep all of us interested. And also you were dealing with sort of a collective of, 5 different people where you wanted every person to have at least an equal level of enthusiasm for the topics you were discussing. So, and then I think at some point, while we still maintain the proper show, we kind of split off into a lot of different, what we like to call like spin-off shows. So they were more specific. We have a show about comics. We have a show about Transformers. We have a show about Mobile Suit Gundam. We have a show about anime. We've got we recently started a index show for Thunderbolts, and we've got
love that one,
the show about Sentai and Tokusatsu and things like that. So we kind of made them sort of genre specific and focused, and I think in that sense, like, I guess at this point we have a shorthand. We kind of know who's going to be involved in certain shows, and other shows sometimes all of us will be involved in. But we kind of have a loose shorthand now where we can kind of guess. Like most times, it's rare for, say, I don't know, Mike to be on a Toku Thursdays or a Sentai Saturdays, but it does happen on occasion. But we kind of have the shorthand where we know, certain folks aren't super interested in being on some shows and the others, and we're actually fine with that. And we just kind of, sometimes that helps with scheduling and stuff like that, where it's maybe one or two of us recording a show as opposed to, all five of us. And, we kind of go on and do the shows, from that vantage point.
Yeah, I know having a lot of people on the show, especially, we've talked about this off air, that me and you're both on the West Coast, and most of the podcasters that I know are on the East Coast or Midwest. Yeah. So that makes it harder to schedule, get recording times, and we're just waking up and they're ready for bed.
Right.
Yeah, pretty close.
Like, I think I frequently, the guys I podcast with, I'd say are mostly a lot of night owls. So what works out best for me is I will record in the evenings with them, and usually we try to record like usually 7 my time, and then it's like 10 their time. But sometimes like some people, they've had changes in work schedules where they're, I'm sure because you're working like a swing type shift or whatever. And like, right some of our guys, they're working like graveyard shifts and things like that. So their sleeping schedules get kind of, drastically affected by that and stuff. So there have been instances where they're like, oh, I thought you were going to be on. And it's like, I fell asleep, and it's like, okay, well, no big deal. We'll reschedule and stuff like that. Yeah. But, so sometimes stuff like that ends up happening. And I know from personal experience, like there were points where, I was working a swing type schedule, so it was like, unfortunately, there would be those instances where, like, when I was working that schedule, I would have the sads because I couldn't go watch, movies on opening night, or I would not be podcasting on certain evenings. I could only do it on the days I had off, because otherwise I was busy, and so sometimes what came out of that is, people would do shows, without me, on some of those off evenings when I was at work and stuff like that. So, you just kind of play around with schedules and everything like that and try to make it work out. But yeah, that's totally a sort of the growing pains or the day-to-day kind of things of scheduling podcast shows, like figuring out people's, schedules and what time zones they're in and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So let's go back in time a little bit. What got you started podcasting? Why did you decide to, I got nothing better to do in my life. Let's do some podcasting.
Well, like my initial foray into sort of, I don't know, social media entertainment, I guess, for lack of a better term, was YouTube. Like I was doing YouTube videos, and that was the History of Comics on Film project, which I still do, but they just don't come out as often, and usually they're a lot longer and take me a lot more time to make. I'm in the middle of editing a video right now for Superman 2, because that's where I'm at in the chronology, and so I'm getting ready to release that. But the reason why that ties into how I got started in podcasting is originally I guess this is funny because I think I've found a whole wonderful community of podcast friends and fellow podcasters like yourself. And I think I was originally searching for that when I was making videos. Like I was trying to sort of reach out to people that I saw that had their own video channels, and it was back in sort of the nascent days of stuff like Blip TV, where people monetized videos and supposedly made a pretty good living off of them. I remember I did monetize some of my videos on Blip, but at best it was like maybe I made $20 within a quarter or something like that. So it was never anything really that I could live off of. It wasn't like I'm retiring because I'm on Blip TV. Like it was never anything like that. Right. But I did notice there was this community of I guess video content creators years. And at one point, I made a video that was like a response video to a review video that somebody made of Cry for Justice. And I kind of made this long-winded, unscripted rebuttal to it and, you know, kind of got into a bunch of talking points. And I just sort of edited it up and put it online and sent it to the guy. And I thought maybe, you know, even though we had a disagreement about the content of the story, like maybe that would be a, you know, an olive branch to like sort of create connections and, you know, sort of become part of a larger kind of, I guess, you know, YouTube video content creator kind of community. And it didn't quite work out that way. But what was interesting about it is the people that were some people that were fans of his, one of them was a comic book podcaster, and his name was Tim, and he had a show called Thoom, the comic book podcast, and he invited me on that podcast. And that was the first time I had ever been on a podcast. And, you know, first it was like, oh, I'll gladly pay you for your time and this and that and the other thing. I was like, no, this is crazy. Like, I'll come on. Like, I don't, you know, I don't need compensation. Like, I'm not anybody special. You know, I just make YouTube videos. Like, it's not a big deal. And so I came on and did a few shows with him. And I think at some point, some of the guys on Bot Talk, which was a message board I had been on for probably like 10 years before that, you know, way back in like 98, 99 or something, like they also kind of started mentioning, hey, do you guys want to like actually, you know, instead of just talking on a message board, like, do you want to get together on maybe like Skype and maybe start a podcast and stuff? And that was kind of Tony. And Tony was like, hey, do you want to do that? And so he got a bunch of us together. And one night we just randomly started talking and recorded it. And we must have talked for like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 hours. Like, we couldn't shut the fuck up. And like we just kept going. And I ended up editing that 5 or 6 hours into like 1 hour. And that was our first show. And then from there, like, we just kept doing it. We tried to do it on a weekly basis, but because of what I was talking about with the, like, I had a swing shift and there was all kinds of stuff going on, I think it sort of became, it ended up becoming like a bi-monthly podcast, and we did these kind of commentary videos, and then we inserted those into the off weeks and did it kind of like that for a while. And then eventually it got to the point where I was no longer on a swing shift thing, and I kind of mapped out our recording schedule and did it in a way where, for me at least, this is the way it's worked out for me, even though I think there were certain aspects where people enjoyed the aspect of recording a podcast kind of quote unquote in real time, you know, like recording something on, say, a Saturday or a Sunday and then dropping it on a Monday, you know, like quickly editing it and dropping it immediately because you wanted to have it be, you know, current, quote unquote, and up to date. But I found, just for my own sanity and my peace of mind, like, the way I do things now is we typically record, you know, anywhere from 3 to 6 months in advance. And then we have, you know, a bunch of sort of, you know, I guess what happens there is you get a bunch of raw files sitting on your computer and you slowly go through the backlog and edit them. But since we are working in advance, you know, I've got plenty of stuff ready to be released way up until, you know, March and April. And then there's a couple shows where here and there, there's some shows that we're going to record a little more concurrently to tie into certain things, but it's not so, I guess, oppressive as, you know, oh, every single week you're under the grind to record a show, edit it, and release it. I guess I can't live like that. And so that was always my philosophy, was I'll get a good number of shows in the can so you have a good backlog or a good, you know, kind of buffer of produced and edited content, so that if somebody says, hey, I'm busy this week, or hey, a family emergency came up, or whatever, it's not like, oh no, this is the end of the world, what are we going to do now? It's more like, great, you had a family emergency, go handle it, we'll do it next week. Who gives who gives a crap? Like, to me, like, that takes a lot of pressure off of me, and that's kind of how I tend to produce content. And I think when I was the only person editing shows, I think that wasn't necessarily understood by everyone involved in the project. But I think the more people got involved in editing and creating and producing their own content, the more it became accepted, like, oh yeah, I see why you do it this way. Like, this makes total sense. And so at that point, like, it sort of became the common thing. I mean, a lot of times people will look to my, sometimes people, Justin's like, oh, you got your bat prep time, cheat sheet of what we're doing next. Like, a lot of times people are asking me, like, what are we doing next? Like, what's going on? And I have the sheet, that's like, all my stuff that's, kind of, and, I'm always, I mean, to me, what I had to learn was, just because I write something down doesn't set it in stone. Like, I had to sort of learn that, it's not like my way or the highway, or that I can't be flexible. Like, I sort of now at this point, it's like I write stuff down, but it's just like, this is kind of a rough outline, and it's like I'm totally willing to, like, I think I had a certain outline planned for March, and just based on the last couple recordings we did, I've totally like reconfigured that whole outline, so now totally different things are being released, and that bumps a bunch of other shows like down the list and everything. And then on top of that, like lately we tend to do a lot of like movie tie-ins where we'll talk about specific comic book themes for a show based on the movies that are being released and stuff like that. But then the movies go and up and change their release dates, like, a bunch of times. So it was like, I was like trying to figure out, I was like, oh, I didn't know, Endgame changed its release date, so now I gotta switch this. And I didn't know that, it was like X-Men Dark Phoenix was going to be released in February. So we have that show. We've had that show done for a long time. And then now it's going to be released in June when the movie comes out. So I had to like move that down. And then the thing I don't know if it's ever going to see the light of day is we recorded a New Mutants podcast for the New Mutants movie, like, I don't know, like 2 years ago. But like, I'm just hanging on to it. And I think come hell or high water, I'm probably going to end up releasing it in August, whether the damn movie comes out or not, because I need something to slot in that month, So, but yeah, it's just like things like that, like, or I guess just if you're going for that, tie-in aspect, like you're going to come across things where you have to be malleable and flexible and kind of change things. And sometimes I'll record things and I have no idea. Like, the thing that drives me crazy is Netflix. Like, when we try to tie things into Netflix, it's like Netflix seems to wait till the very last minute to say, it's like the week before, something drops, they're like, oh, guess what? This show's coming out, So I remember, like, when The Punisher season 1 was going to come out, it was like, well, we think it's going to come out around this month, like, we're not really sure. And now we've got a couple other, super secret podcasts that we've recorded and have plans to release that tie into certain things. But to be perfectly honest, I have no idea when those are coming out. So it just kind of hangs there like a, it's like a fun albatross where I don't know when it's going to drop, but it's going to happen at some point,
Right on. So we've talked about some of the problems you've been having, the scheduling and release dates and all that. What are the biggest obstacles with your show as it is right now?
Stupid Skype updates and the recording software issues, I think, with dealing with, like, especially when you have multiple people, you're dealing with, 5 different sets of equipment and troubleshooting those kind of things. And then, I mean, I guess the way to get around that is to have things be uniform as much as they can. I mean, I can't go out and buy, the same computer for everybody or anything like that. But I mean, one thing I did do was I did get everybody the same microphone. So, I mean, in some sense, my hope was that, at the very least, they'd all be, quote unquote, professional level microphones, and that could eliminate one, potential pitfall of recording with a group of, my regular group of fanholes, basically, like that would eliminate one thing that could be a potential problem as far as that goes. The other problem was always, because we originally used a software called Pamela for Skype, and for a long time that worked out really great for us. It was, as far as I was concerned, it was a good software. I used it. I was able to split it into 2 channels, my channel and then the Skype channel with everybody else on the call, that made it really easy to use stuff like do noise reduction in Audacity, or maybe even use Levelator and things like that on aspects of the recording. But at some point, Microsoft released a bunch of updates to Skype, and at that point, Pamela just stopped working. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it never recovered. Like, I think those Microsoft Skype updates killed that company. Like, I feel like, because I would go to their Facebook page, I'd post things, I'd see other people complaining, and they'd go, "Oh, we're so sorry, we're going to try to come out with an update." And every time they released an update, we would try to update it, and didn't do anything. And they kept claiming like, "Oh, this update's going to be the one," and it didn't do anything. And it was just like, at that point, we had to start looking for other stuff. So one of the speaking of the podcast community, one of my good podcast buddies who's on the shout out to the Action Figure Blues podcast, John Vanover, who's been on our show quite a few times, like I remember asking him about what kind of software he used to record, and he uses a program called Amolto. And so I ended up getting that. And, to this point, I mean, there have been some issues with Skype and updates where, depending on what version of the update we all had, there were some weird things where we've heard weird clicky noises and different nonsense in some of the recordings. Like, thankfully, since most of the recent updates, that seems to have gone away, and it was hard to isolate and figure out like what it was, other than Microsoft had a bunch of crappy Skype updates. But Amolto's been kind of has, I guess, at this point replaced Pamela for Skype for us, where I can split it into 2 tracks. I can do that. I kind of feel like Skype wants you to use their onboard recording software. So I also usually run that in the background as a quote unquote backup. My only issue with that is that it is a single track, and I just find that there are benefits to having multiple tracks, to where if people are not always on the mute button with their trigger finger, or the silent button with their trigger finger, every once in a while, somebody can't help it, they sneeze or they cough or whatever it is, and they didn't get to that mute button in time. It's like, it's not a big deal if there's a separate track, and you can just excise that, track 2 sneeze, because it doesn't hurt anything from the call. But when you have a single track like that, and somebody's into a big dissertation about, the tyrants of Kolu and their merger with Lady Quark and Vril Dox, and then somebody, I don't know, lays a big fart, it's like you're kind of stuck with it on the sole track, right? Like, there's nothing you can do about it. So, that's something where you either have to accept it or try to work with stuff that gives you, multiple tracks. And so usually what I try to do is I'll record the Amolto thing and use that. And, I just consider the onboard Skype tool to record as a potential backup, just in case something went awry with the other recording. At least we can have, that onboard Skype thing as a backup. I mean, hey, if the Skype tool, the onboard recording thing, gets to the point where you can click a button and it can, release 2 files for everybody that's on the call, or 5 files for everybody that's on the call, I would totally use it then. Like, I'd be on board with it. But for right now, it seems like it's just a sole track. So I kind of, I keep that as a backup just for giggles to try it. I did have a recording with Luke Giaconetti that I did with me and him, and just to experience it, I did both. I did the Amolto and I did the onboard Skype thing. But for that one time, I just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to try to edit with the onboard Skype just to see how it goes, and use that. And that's ultimately the one I did. And actually, that file is something I sent over to Mike a long time ago, because it's going to be part of the Thunderbolts, the Justice not entirely dissimilar to Lightning Talk, and it's going to be part of an episode of that. So that you'll I guess eventually you'll hear how that turned out. But I was fine with it. But like I said, you don't have the option to sort of manipulate 2 different tracks. You're kind of stuck with that single track.
Right. Well, I can't wait to hear that. I love that Just Like Lightning show.
Cool, thanks.
Big
I think Mike would be really happy about that because that's kind of his baby. He was like, I want to do this. He loves the Thunderbolts, and I have nothing. Obviously I like reading them and everything, and I was into the Thunderbolts as well. But I just be willing to say that Mike's passion, exceeds my own, and so he was sort of the one who came up with that show and was, the one that, essentially I consider him the producer of that show. And I think at some point I laid down like ground rules where I'm like, if it's your idea, you have to produce it, like that thing, and it's like, most people, it's not like a bad thing. It's like most people are like, yeah, totally, like that makes sense. And, to me, it's like Big in Japan is the show we do about anime, and that's Justin's baby, that's his brainchild, and they're both really, really good shows and everything. And I enjoy being a part of them, and they're the ones that really, kind of decide about the content, and they produce and edit those shows and everything. So I'm pretty happy with it. I think in that instance, there was some, like, you're speaking of problems, right? Like, the behind the scenes look of stuff. I mean, the main problem was, I think at the time, we had originally intended to get together with Luke on a certain night, and it was going to be Mike, me, and Luke. But then I guess Mike's roommate had some kind of crazy party at the last minute, and he couldn't, he was like, it's going to be terrible if I record with you guys because you're going to hear a bunch of noise and stuff. So rather than try to reschedule with Luke, I didn't want to waste his time because he had already set aside the time to be there. I just went, hey, why don't you and I record the half of the show that we were going to do for the historical segment, and then me and Michael get together and do the standard issue, and he said, okay, that sounds good. And so that's ultimately how I decided to handle that. But and that's the a peek behind the veil or whatever, but with scheduling conflicts and how I decided to handle it. But I mean, you could have easily handled it as Luke's a nice guy. I mean, I'm sure I suppose if we had really been hell bent on having all three of us on the entire show, like we could have tried to reschedule again, but I just felt like, he was, sometimes you feel like, okay, well, we scheduled and at least two of the three of us are here, so let's try to get something done, Well,
yeah, that might not. I'm loving that. I enjoy your shows, but yeah, I'm just a big Thunderbolt fan. So when you guys started doing that one, I was like, oh yes, it's not coming soon enough. Come on, more.
Yeah, we're I guess that's the other caveat of it, where it's like we have a bunch of ideas, and even though I don't know that we necessarily advertise ourselves as a network, but we're a network. But to be honest, it's all the same people doing all the same shows. So it's like sometimes it's like one of those things where I know people want more, say, Kakaida coverage, or they want to see more Mobile Suit Gundam coverage or things like that, and it's like we probably haven't done one of those in a number of months. So it's not that we've stopped or pod faded or whatever. Like, obviously we're still producing weekly content. It's just we're jumping and moving around to things that that we're in the moment with, and unfortunately some of those things we just don't happen to be in the moment at the time is all. But I think I don't know that I probably can't promise that we'll have at least one Thunderbolts podcast a month, but I think that's what we're shooting for at any rate,
Right on. So let's get a little more personal if you don't mind. Do you have a family?
Yeah, sort of.
Are you married?
I'm single. I mean, I'm not in the sense of, I don't have a wife and kids and things like that, but I mean, I do have family.
And how does your family feel about, I mean, do you live with family, or are you by yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I live with my dad, and we've got a dog, and that's essentially the immediate family. I mean, I've podcasted with my dad, so he's certainly supportive of that. Like I brought him on one of my shows at one point. I mean, that was something that I had wanted to do, and at one point we did end up doing, like, there was like a blackout or something, and we didn't have anything better to do. So, I kind of said, hey, do you want to do that thing I talked about? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so we did that. And, he's always been, I mean, he's been supportive of the majority of my endeavors, regardless of what they are. But I mean, he's definitely supportive of that. Like, there's never been any kind of, contention or what the hell are you doing or that kind of thing. Like he I guess I'd say supportive insofar as he's been on the show. He has no problem with me spending my time doing it. I don't know that he listens to every single thing I release. He'll probably check out a few things here and there and tell me, hey, I listened to this and laughed at it and whatever. But, obviously, like, a lot of the content is not necessarily things that are up his alley, so to speak. It's not like he has very much interest. He doesn't really know much about things like anime or things like that. And he'll occasionally watch some of the comic book movies with me and stuff like that. But, his knowledge of comic books is probably, if you listen to the show, he talks about it a little bit. I mean, he read, things like Superboy comics when he was a kid and stuff like that. So, I mean, he has some knowledge of it, but not the extent that some of us do in the podcast, that we're sort of, knee deep in the comics minutia and all that kind of stuff.
Right on. It's good to hear. It's good to hear when your parents get involved and you get them on the show. It's always a good thing.
My dog is completely unsupportive of my podcast. He barks during all kinds of podcasts and goes outside and howls like an idiot. So he's also part of the family, but he does not support the podcast. He supports himself because he's Snoopy. He's a dog.
So what do you enjoy the most about podcasting? What's your most favorite thing about doing this?
I guess like there's certain things like where I guess people have asked like what my favorite like type thing is, like in terms of like the actual shows and stuff. Right. And like sometimes like you come up with a good idea, you execute it, you edit it, you complete it, and it's everything you wanted it to be. Like, and I mean, and it's like, I don't know if it's like too self-congratulatory, like where you're patting yourself on the back, but you're like, you have a concept for a show, you implement the concept, you execute the concept, and then after that, you're like, man, that was perfect. Like, that was on, like we were on fire that show, like that kind of thing. Right. And like, I'm just full disclosure, I don't think that about every single show, but the two shows I can think of and one of them wasn't even my idea, so it's not like I'm self-congratulating myself either. Like Mike came up with the Transformers Tuesdays where we were going to look at Transformers commercials. And it was a really cool show because it was like typically like a lot of the founding fanholes, like there's still mainly the four of us, including myself, still do shows together from time to time. But, Brian sporadically joins us here and there, but he's not as much of a regular podcaster as we are. He does have a family and he's got kids and he's got a wife and things like that. So like a lot of those things preoccupy his time. So occasionally he joins us, but getting into that, like that becomes something that takes precedent or priority over the podcasting, obviously. Right. But thankfully, we were able to have him for that show. So there were the five of us, and we were all talking about Transformers commercials, and we would watch the commercials that Mike selected, and then we'd go into it. And man, like if that was not the most fun thing that we did, and that seems to have permeated into the people who listened to it. They also had as much fun as we had recording it, and so it was like one of those things where I was like, man, like we were, and it was like, again, like not super self-congratulatory to myself because I did not edit it, I did not come up with the idea, but man, we were on fire that episode, and it was really, really good, and I thought it was well realized, and it just turned out to be everything you would have wanted a show like that to be. And then I guess being super self-congratulatory to myself, the other show that I would point to that was everything I wanted it to be this was kind of my idea, and it was the one time Justin kind of let me, I guess, take over Big in Japan, and what I really wanted to do was I said, I want to do an episode about Akira, and he's like, okay, fine, so we're going to watch the movie, and I said, no, we're not just going to watch the movie, like I really think, and there was a lot of resistance to it, but I was like, I think you guys all need to read the manga. because if you don't read the manga, like, you're not going to get this extended appreciation. It's like they're two totally different things. Like, and I've never heard everyone who ever covered Akira, it doesn't matter who they are. It could be, I remember, like, it was like Dr. Bill and Gene Hendricks, I think, talked about it on Anime Freaks. And then, like, I'm trying to think, like, even more recently, like, it was the what's that guy's name? The Angry Video Game Nerd. Like, they had a thing where they talked about Akira on, like, one of their, old movie type things. And this is not disparaging to either of those reviews. They were both very good reviews, but they focus on the film, like,
right.
And most people, in most cases, they've only seen the film. And I was like, you're really missing something if you don't compare and contrast and go through the whole thing. And even though there was a lot of resistance, I was like, I swear, it's like reading a Bendis comic. Like, it'll be fine. Like, even though there's a lot of pages, it won't be that bad. Like, I swear. And so eventually I twisted all their arms. Like, it took like a year, but I twisted people's arms, and I got Justin and Tony to come on with me and talk about it. And I'm super duper happy with how that show turned out. Like, I think it basically everything I had in my mind, and I was the one who came up with it. I was the one who edited it, and then we recorded the show, and like, that is something that I'm really, really proud of as far as podcasting goes. And I think it turned out to be everything that I sort of intended it to be and more. So and that's just, I guess in the long-winded, long way around to answer your question, like, those are some things that I'm, really pleased with in terms of my favorite thing about podcasting, never mind kind of the whole community aspect that I've been kind of skirting around, the ability to talk to people like yourself, the ability to meet and engage and hopefully understand that we both have, say, things like comic books and podcasting as a common shared ground. Like, we all have some experience doing podcasting. We all have a lot of experience, say, reading comics or what have you. And thus we've got hopefully a wonderful shorthand and a way to, interact with all these people that, is not born out of argument or anger or anything bad. It's all to me has been extremely positive. And so I'm extremely thankful that I've somehow that I stumbled into this. Like, I kind of stumbled into it. Like, I never really intended to be a podcaster. Like, I was trying to be like one of these YouTube video guys. And, I don't know that I am or am not. Some people really like those history of comics on film videos. And some people are like, when the hell's the next one coming out? And I take a long time to make them. So I don't have as much content as, say, your average YouTube content creator. But I don't think I've enjoyed making them, and I'm glad I made them, but I don't necessarily think that has brought me the same sense of community that podcasting has.
Yeah, like you said, this is a great community. Like I said, I've met a lot of good people through this also. So, yeah, it's. Is there any guests that you want to get on your show? Is anyone that, like a bucket list of guests you'd like to talk with for your shows?
I'm like, I have. Well, it's funny because I think. There was a point in my life where I sort of made or I had a realization where it's like, I better do stuff now, basically before something like that becomes too late. So I try my best to act on maybe not necessarily impulse, but that if I have a motivation to bring a guest on a show, I usually try to mention it to them and act on it. There's a couple things that I have in the back of my head. Like, I don't know that I want to like name drop a bunch of people, but like there's stuff that I thought of where I was like, oh, who would be really cool to talk to is this podcaster or that podcaster and stuff like that. And so there are some things I have in the works that are sort of on the back burner, like as far as, scheduling and when we're going to get to certain things. And then, there's other things where I guess they're still in my head. Like, I haven't exactly revealed them to the mass public yet, where I'm just like, what would be a cool show is to do this topic with this podcaster and get together and do it. Like, I guess I can do something that has happened and give you that as an example, which I was really happy with. Was I initially suggested to Paul Spataro, I was like, what you should do is, you should do Is It Jaws on the Space Battleship Yamato live action movie, because Dr. Bill and Gene will be all over that and it'll be really cool and whatever. And I think Paul was kind of like, well, he wasn't really familiar with it and he wasn't that into it or whatever. So I was just like, you know what? F it. I'm going to invite them on the show and do it myself. And so I did that. I talked to Dr. Bill and talked to Gene, and they were up for it. And they came on the show and all that stuff. And I was really happy with how that turned out. And luckily, like that's an anime that Mike was really familiar with, and it's a movie and anime that Justin really liked. So I was able to get a good group of us together to discuss it and everything. And that was just something that obviously it was a series of guests that I wanted, and they were nice enough to come on the show, and so I got the guests, and it all kind of worked out and everything, and yeah, for sure, there's always going to be stuff like that where I think of things. Andy Leyland was a guest I had on because I was like, who I need to talk to. Like I knew I always wanted to talk about the Galactica 1980 comic book with somebody, and I was like, Andy's the perfect person to talk about this with, so that was something where I was like super happy to have that happen, and that it was, again, he was nice enough to respond and everything. I mean, that was something that took a long time too, because I think we emailed back and forth, and it kind of fell by the wayside, and we re-engaged again, and then at some point it became timely for both of us to do it, and then eventually that podcast was done, and that was before we had the comic book specific one, so that's still a quote unquote proper show, even though we're talking about comic books and everything. But that was something where I was like, it'd be great to talk to Andy Leyland about this, and I did. So like I think there are other things like that on the horizon, but for lack of wanting to I guess keep some things a surprise, like I'll probably keep some of the things I definitely have lined up a secret, and some of the things that are just still stuck in my head a secret, just in case those don't work out or whatever. But, that's which again is not, it's never a big deal, but and like I said, I did kind of reveal like Luke Giaconetti's a great guest to have, and he will be on an episode of Justice Not Entirely Dissimilar to Lightning, and I have kind of hinted at wanting other people to come on the Thunderbolt show as well, so definitely.
And talking about podcasts, do you actually listen to podcasts on your own if you have free time, and if so, what's a couple of your favorites?
I do. I frequently, I have to, my commute to work usually entails going to BART. And so typically, like a lot of what I spend doing in my downtime on my commute is listening to podcasts. I think I listen to podcasts in lieu of music almost, like most people might listen to the radio or listen to songs and all this other kind of stuff. So I think I tend to listen to podcasts and stuff, and besides listening, like as I recently listened to your Head Speaks, the one about the Adventures of Superman annual, because I really dig it. So I was listening to that. I'm trying to think of like some of the recent stuff. I listened to Batgirl to Oracle. I listened to like a lot of the stuff on the Fire and Water Network. I listened to most anything that Andy Leyland puts out. I love Back to the Bins. I listen to a lot of the Two True Freaks stuff. I love a lot of the guests I mentioned. The Action Figure Blues podcast is a great podcast about action figures. We have a whole lot of like friends in the community that we've had on the show, where we've got our buddy Zach from Bot Talk, who does a podcast called Bored with Friends, that's about board games, and then Bored with Friends, that's about whatever he wants to talk about, which sometimes is Transformers comics or whatever. But so he's got those sets of podcasts. We've got some buddies that I don't know if they pod faded or not, but they did a show called Animated Indulgence, where they talk about cartoons. There's I'm trying to think like what else I've recently listened to, but yeah, I mean I'm always listening to podcasts all the time. My buddy TJ does the Quad M show, and that's kind of like a morning radio show almost, kind of like a Howard Sternish type show and stuff, but a podcast. And I've been on his show a few times, so
I guess I'm just going down the list because I feel like if I leave somebody out, they're going to be sad. You know what I mean? Like, cause you're like sitting there going, like, here, I'll pull up. Let me see what's on Derek's Dropbox, because that's what I typically do. I log a bunch of crap on my Dropbox. So here we go. I got some Back to the Bins. I got some Batgirl to Oracle. I've got some Cast Protection from Two True Freaks. I've got Film and Water. That's what's on my thing at the moment. So that's. But I oftentimes my Dropbox will get so overloaded, it'll be like, you don't have enough space, so it's like if your podcast is not currently on my Dropbox, do not feel bad. It's just because I usually overload the free like 1 gig of space with all these shows, and then I'm often like running to like Stitcher Radio, like I did to listen to Aaron's show, where I was like, I got too much space on the Dropbox, but I want to listen to Aaron's show now, so yeah, there's always stuff like that where, I'll switch back and forth. Like if you're on Stitcher, odds are I will listen to you on Stitcher sometimes. And then, a lot of the times I'll direct download shows like Diablo Frank, the Marvel superheroes, and Spawn-ometer, I just listened to, he did I don't know if it was like an Underguides or what it was supposed to be, but he did the show about, I think it was like Anissa, which was like there were like African American superhero comics that came, I think, before Milestone that I'd never heard of, and he did a really great like in-depth like coverage of those, so that was like something I recently listened to. Or they did the Marvel superhero show all about Nick Fury and everything, which was really great. So like, yeah, there's plenty of awesome, stuff, just everybody I mentioned does a lot of good work, and I enjoy listening to it all,
Right on. Good to hear. And finally, if there's any new people out there thinking about starting podcasting, do you have advice for them? Do you have advice for the new podcasters out there?
I guess, like, make sure you're passionate about what you want to podcast about. That's probably the key, right? Because if it's just kind of like you want to podcast for the sake of podcasting, that might not work out. But I think if you're passionate about it, it ultimately it's not going to matter what kind of equipment you have and all this other kind of stuff. Like, I mean, obviously you should look into that, and I think everybody has their growing pains, but I think it usually starts out with that kernel of being passionate for what topics you're going to discuss on your podcast, and then move on from there, and try it out. I mean, for me, I have to admit, I feel like I have always podcasted with people. So, I mean, I don't know, that's something you might want to come to on your own, but, I know some people effortlessly sort of podcast on their own, I've heard, you have done that, like, Andy Leyland, like some of the people we talked about, like they have like a solo show where it's just them. I don't know that I feel it's like, I guess the History of Comics on Film is a little different because it's a video thing and it's scripted, so but I mean, just me shooting off the cuff, like say Luke Giaconetti would on Earth Destruction Directive, like that. I don't know that I remember I had a conversation with Luke once about that where I was like, I don't know that I can do that really, like, and I had contemplated it for like certain things, but I ultimately decided against that. But I think that might be something that you should think about. Like, is that something you want to do with people? And are there people who are as passionate as you are about the topic you want to talk about? And if not, are you willing to, give it the college try and do a solo show? Like those kind of, things to consider. And then after that, think about, what kind of microphone you might want, and, will it work with your regular setup? Do you have, the equipment to record and edit and maybe the software and that kind of thing. And then, from there, that, maybe how much money you're willing to spend on it, given that, I mean, I guess something we haven't gone into, but like I host stuff at Podbean.
like that's what I use, you know. So
Right.
we pay the whatever it is, the yearly subscription to get up on Podbean and stuff like that. And you know, that's something to be considered. Or you know, whether you know in some cases, some people, you know, Two True Freaks, Fire and Water, like they have entire websites dedicated to their podcast and stuff. I mean, our operation is a little, you know, kind of cheap Charlie chintzy thing. You know, we're still on the blog spots and all that stuff, you know. And to me, that's a decision I had to come to myself, was did I want to spend the money to make a website? Did I want to have somebody build a website and pay them the money? And, you know, when all was said and done, I kind of thought, you know, I'm happy with what I'm doing now, you know. So right. I just went ahead and, you know, for now, I mean, it's on Podbean, and we have kind of using, you know, that kind of free blogspot type stuff. You know, some people, they like putting their podcast on the Internet Archive, and it's totally for free. So, you know, I guess it's all up to that kind of stuff is up to your individual discretion, but it's something you may want to think about before you get into podcasting.
That's why, because again, I got no money and I'm cheap, so that's why I've got all mine up on the Internet Archive. And it's working for now, so we'll see what happens in the future. Yeah. Well, again, it was great talking with you about this. I enjoy talking to other podcasters and getting some of their behind-the-scenes stuff and their history, if you will. So I thank you very much for taking time out of your day to talk with me about this.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm glad you sat here and listened to me ramble about podcasting.
I loved it. Before we go, I want to show everyone out there, if they want to hear more about your podcasting, where can they find you? Or your YouTube? Where can they find you on the internet?
On the interwebs, I'm over at fanholespodcast.blogspot.com. And if you want to check out the history of comics on film videos, it's at hocof.blogspot.com.
Well, thank you very much again, Derek, for, again, talking with me. I loved hearing your stories. So, and I say maybe we'll get together again sometime and do something.
Yeah.
Especially since I realize that we're so close.
Things. Yeah.
Be a lot easier than most of the people I talk with.
Yeah, maybe we could do one of those freaky deaky live podcasts where we stare into each other's eyes and stuff. You know?
There you go.
Yeah.
That sounds romantic. We got to try that.
Or maybe there's like a con or something we can meet up at, or something like that, a local thing, and maybe do a recording or something like that.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to something like that, man. All right, well, Mitchie, thank you very much for talking with me. We're going to go and move on. There's no real feedback to give. I think I've given all the feedback I need to give. Unfortunately, I don't get any emails from you guys. I haven't got any ratings from anybody. Go ahead and go on Apple Podcasts, rate me, give me a review, let me know what you guys think. I would love hearing from everybody. Send me an email, send me a Facebook post. I know I do have a new listener out there, Jonathan Hames, who's actually, I'm playing his podcast this episode. I met him on Facebook. We have mutual friends in common. We met through a comment on that. And I'd mentioned that I do, podcasts. And so he asked which podcasts I do. I gave him a list, and he said he started listening. He's been listening to the G.I. Joe one, some of the others. And I just want to say, hey, Jonathan, so I'm playing his promo this time. He's got a new podcast with his wife. So just want to give him a shout out. And anyone that that's written in, or again, no one's written in, but anyone that's commented on my Facebook posts. Again, I don't check Twitter like I should. I need to get back on Twitter. That's at Headcast Network, or on Facebook, I'm at Headcast Network or Head Speaks. Again, either one, you can find me there. But yeah, I'm kind of babbling at this point. Go ahead and write in and let me know what you guys think. I enjoy hearing from you guys. I guess that's going to do it. Until next time, remember, Head has spoken. Thank you for listening to another fantastic episode of Head Speaks. Hope you enjoyed it. If so, let me know. Drop me an email to head@headspeaks.com or visit our home at head.headspeaks.com. You can also visit and talk with me on Facebook and Google+, both under Head Speaks. You can also send an MP3 file with your thoughts, and I can play that on the air. And you can also get more of me on my other podcasts.
Be sure to listen to Task Force X, where monthly I look at John Ossinger's Suicide Squad and Paul Kuppenberg's Checkmate comics from the 80s and early 90s. Also, over on G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, my podcasting friends Ryan Daly and Kyle Benning, along with myself, are looking at all of the G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero comics, and related titles from Marvel and IDW. All of my headcasts are available on iTunes and Stitcher, along with the respective blogs and my main page at headspeaks.com. All comments, thoughts, and opinions expressed on Head Speaks are owned wholly by the speaker of said comments, and do not express the opinions of Head Speaks, unless, of course, I'm the one making the comments. Head Speaks, Task Force X, and G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, are all part of the Headcast family. So, join us next month for another wonderful episode of Head Speaks. Until then, I'll see you in the funny pages. Good night.